Good afternoon. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, and welcome to the first guest lecture of the academic year. Our guest tonight is Paolo Coen, professor of art history at the Università degli Studi in Teramo, in Abruzzo. He's also taught in several other institutions, such as the Ateneo of Udine and the University of the Sapienza. I have to say the Sapienza out of the goodness of his heart. Paolo wrote regularly for the monthly journal Roma Ieri, Oggi e Domani. This is some time ago, but still it's important to say that about your biography, because this journal is dedicated to the visual cultural legacy of Rome. For example, to the great vedute, the great perspectives and views of the city in the 16th and into the 19th centuries. Among his principal writings is an excellent study of Giuseppe Vasi's Magnificenze di Roma, the Magnificences of Rome. And that was actually the first time I encountered Paolo's work and was quite impressed by that. So I strongly recommend his study on Giuseppe Vasi. He is also the editor of the book Art, Market in Rome in the 18th Century, a study in the social history of art, which sheds new light on the Grand Tour, on publications and patronage. He's also the author of the Recupero del Rinascimento, which I'm presently reading, an extensive study of art and politics in the last decades of the 19th century, when Rome really became the capital of a unified Italy. The subject of tonight's lecture is the recent findings at the Vittoriano in Rome. And yesterday he gave us a short preview about what he called some interesting surprises, and we're looking forward to hearing that. He didn't tell us all the surprises, so we hope to hear most of them right now. And we're quite eager to hear more about these recent findings. Please welcome Professor Paolo Coen.
Okay. Here's the main lithography that Joseph Pennell dedicated to the Vittoriano. Pennell made it in 1911, the year of the inauguration of the monument of the Vittoriano. Pennell, one of the leading illustrators in the United States, was inspired by Giovanni Battista Piranesi to render the image of an open, dynamic, efficient building, a site in full ferment. The Vittoriano represents an important building for Rome and for the Italian state. It is so today. Every year, 5 million visitors go to the Vittoriano, visit the Vittoriano in today's European and democratic Italy. But it was also important yesterday. At that precise time, Rome chose the high Renaissance style as its national language. The project was to exploit its glorious past, classical and Renaissance, to win the competition in the arts against Paris. Art production, art trade, a vital sector to give breath to a national glory in a climate of increasing nationalism. The Vittoriano represented the main testbed for this challenge. The Vittoriano was also an important monument for the United States of America. Americans of that time observed the Vittoriano with very different eyes from those of today's Americans, and we had a test in the lunchtime. From 1876 until the early 19th century, the ancient Rome and the new Rome, with freedom of speech and religious beliefs, was a city of reference for a large number of artists, patrons, and men and women of culture from overseas. Again, with Paris, and in some respect, more than Paris. Okay, this is how we're going to spend our next minutes together. It's fair to start by taking some time to repeat to myself, first of all, a general profile of the Vittoriano, from its genesis to the choice of its architect, Giuseppe Sacconi. We will try then to clarify how the Vittoriano fits into a very hot topic in the Italian Risorgimento, that of the national language or national style, and why it gave a true and satisfactory solution to it. Finally, we will assess the origins and deep meaning of the national style adopted in the Vittoriano. I naturally expect a phase with questions and answers. I've put it at the end, but please feel free to interrupt if something has not been said clearly enough, or you feel the need for further explanation. Before getting to the heart of the matter, I would like to thank my colleague, Samir Younes, for having invited me here. Thank you very much. I would also to thank Stefanos Poliozoides, the Dean of the School of Architecture. Thank you very much. And Kerry Rulli, David Salem, and all those who organized my trip and sojourn here. I also finally would like to thank Jane Yunash, who was so kind to prepare my visit to your beautiful university. It's my first time here, and I'm really appreciating all this. The Vittoriano is the main monument in honor of Victor Emmanuel II, Italy's first king. Sometimes it's called Altare della Patria, the altar of the fatherland, and it is located right in the very center of Rome. It has nothing to do with Gabriele D'Annunzio's Vittoriale degli Italiani, 500 kilometers north on the Lake Garda. The original idea of the Vittoriano dates back to January 1878, when the first king of Italy, I said Victor Emmanuel, was on his deathbed, was dying. The idea came from Prime Minister Agostino De Pretis and Interior Minister Francesco Crispi. The idea was to build a state monument to the memory of the first king, so as to identify the king with the homeland itself. The person of the king and the Savoy monarchy in full became the shield to defend the young kingdom of Italy from its enemies, new enemies such as the international anarchy. Anarchy had strong roots in Italy, also thanks to Mikhail Bakunin. After several failed terrorist attacks against the Savoy family, the anarchists eventually succeeded on 29th July 1900, killing King Umberto I in Monza. Other historical enemies of the Kingdom of Italy were Bourbons of Naples, Borboni. Defeated in 1860-1861 by General Garibaldi, the Bourbons tried every means to gain back their throne. Quite the same might be said about the Roman pontiffs. Starting, of course, from Pius IX, the popes tried to regain possession of the state of the church. Things started to change only with Pius X at the beginning of the new century. So again, the first meaning of the Vittoriano was to convey the affection of Italians toward the first king, so to become a shield against the enemies of Italy. To get from idea to project required two competitions, not one, two of them. Having the first one failed, the second competition was held in 1882-1883. As the German scholar Thorsten Rodiek notes, the second competition made things easier and let the political nature of the monument become obvious. Its urban cornerstones were laid directly by Prime Minister Agostino De Pretis. Again, the Vittoriano was to be erected in the heart of Rome on the Capitol Hill, Campidoglio. That is, to stand as a scenic backdrop with an ascending terraced course. Also clear is the orientation exactly northwards, that is, toward Via del Corso and even further towards Piazza del Popolo, traditionally the entrance to the city for travelers who would come from north. The statue of King Victor Emmanuel II was to dominate the center. The statue, which later became an equestrian statue, like the Marcus Aurelio, now the Emperor Marcus Aurelius, which is very close, was and still the main sculpture, still is the main sculptural element of a rich sculptural apparatus. The winner of this second competition was Giuseppe Sacconi, a young architect from the Marche region. Here is an image of Sacconi's winning project, dating 1882. As one can see, its structure is quite close to the final monument, with few exceptions. One of Sacconi's main characteristic was his strong classical and neo-Renaissance background. I show here a previous project of Sacconi, the facade for a small but impressive church in Force, right in the province of Marche, in the heart of Marche region, where he came from. One may successfully compare the church in Force to a project which is traditionally ascribed to Donato Bramante, Santa Maria Annunziata of Roccaverano in Piedmont, northern Italy. Sacconi started to build the Vittoriano in 1885, 3 years after the project we've seen together. He changed it radically. He had to change radically the statics of the building, distributing the weight through a complex system of tunnels and arcades. Sacconi led the building site until his death in September 1905. In the perspective of the inauguration, 3 architects took over a sort of triumvirate. After all, we are in Rome. The aim now was to inaugurate the monument in 1911 to celebrate the first 50 years of the kingdom. This was an order coming directly from the young king, Victor Emmanuel III, grandson and namesake of Victor Emmanuel II. To glorify his grandfather would serve to glorify his lineage and thus himself. This was essentially the king's thinking. Work went on after 1911. Many parts still had to be completed, especially the sculptural decorations, including the 2 large bronze quadrigas at the top of the building. After the First World War, the monument would see the addition of the tomb of the unknown soldier in 1921. The completion of the building owes a lot to Armando Bresini, one of the main architects of the fascist era. I have already mentioned the issue of the national style. In the mentality of the 19th century, the national style indicated that particular artistic and especially architectural language capable more and better than any other language of interpreting and conveying the soul of a single nation, and consequently also the language to be adopted on an official and institutional level in the various modern buildings. The issue was not typical of Italy. It started in the France of Hippolyte Taine and in the England of Augustus Pugin, and then extended to the New Germany. These countries adopted for their respective declinations, the respective declinations of Gothic, as well known. But for various reasons, things became more complex in the newborn Italy after 1861, I mean. One of these reasons was the poor state of studies on Italian Middle Ages at those times. At those times, people, scholars didn't have a clear view of the role of Italy in the Middle Ages. Only later this would have become true. Eventually, the issue was taken over and resolved by Camillo Boito, one of the most influential personalities in the field of architecture and art of the Italian Risorgimento. Boito worked as an architect, restorer, and theorist in Milan. He was there one of the souls of the Brera Academy, of the Academy of Brera, and later the Politecnico, where he trained 2 generations of architects. He was also very active in the field of learned journalism, earning space as a columnist on art, architecture, and culture in large circulation newspapers and periodicals. We will see shortly how this was effective. Boito dealt with the national style after having chosen 14th century Lombard architecture for some Milanese projects. When it came to Rome, Boito opted in favor of the mature Renaissance of Donato Bramante. As I mentioned earlier, the Vittoriano is a monument with a strong political character. Its political framework was due to Prime Minister Agostino De Pretis. As Prime Minister, De Pretis was also the head of the Royal Commission of the Vittoriano. That is the body of the Italian government in charge of approving all the choices made by architect and expenses related to the monument. Now, since September 1880, De Pretis asked Camillo Boito to become a member of the Royal Commission. Here is the English translation of the document I found in the State Archive of Rome. It is, "My dear sir, my illustrious sir, a commission has been appointed for the Vittoriano. Your illustrious lordship has been called to take part in it." Now, since September 1880, he became then a member. Boito became a member of the commission. And this was a very clever move by Agostino De Pretis. Acting from inside the commission, Boito, among other things, provided De Pretis and the government with the theoretical, technical, and moral support for demolishing the urban tissue of the whole area, so to make room for the monument and the square before it, Piazza Venezia. You see, this is a quite critical point. Even today, some of the criticism stems from the sacrifices needed to make room for the complex, for the Vittoriano, forgetting what has just been exposed. The Vittoriano was conceived as a strong sign of the new kingdom right in the heart of Rome. It was meant to be as this. Boito wrote several articles fighting back the attacks of the archaeologist Rodolfo Lanciani, and convincing the public opinion. I told you, he had a strong public because he was a learned journalist. He knew how to write and communicate it. And again, Boito was behind the choice of architect Giuseppe Sacconi. He was in the commission, so he contributed and convinced others to choose Sacconi. As I said, an architect and a project with a strong neo-Renaissance character. In other terms, a project that relied upon Donato Bramante's mature language, especially the language of the Belvedere courtyard, so to recover some classical landscape scale plans. My immediate reference is to the Temple of Fortuna Primigenia at Preneste, beautiful site, archaeological site, near Rome, a large terraced and stepped construction on a hill with a strong focus in the center, just like the Belvedere and of course the Vittoriano. At the times of Sacconi, the second half of the 19th century, the Temple of Fortuna Primigenia lied under the medieval urban tissue of Palestrina, so it was not visible. Nevertheless, it was very well known since the Renaissance through reconstructions made by several architects, among others, Andrea Palladio, as Jörg Martin Merz has made clear. It seems fair now to broaden the picture and spend a few final minutes on the adoption, the recovery of the Renaissance as a national style of the Kingdom of Italy. In cultural terms, the operation has wide and deep roots and meanings. Let's focus now on the success of the term itself, Rinascimento, Renaissance. Giorgio Vasari and his followers never used the term Renaissance when referring to the period of time, of art time, spanning from Filippo Brunelleschi to Michelangelo. Vasari used the expression maniera moderna, that could be somehow translated in modern manner, and opposing maniera moderna to the darkness of the Middle Ages and of the Byzantine age. The term Renaissance was born and applied to this period of time in France much later, from the 18th and 19th century, but true popularity came thanks to this man, the Swiss historian Jakob Burckhardt, and his book, The Civilization of the Renaissance in Italy. Burckhardt truly marked a turning point in the perception of Italy and its culture. From then on, intellectuals used the term Renaissance as an easy label to point out a period when Italy reached its peak. Italian patriots, on the other hand, established a subtle and effective parallel between Rinascimento, Renaissance, Rinascimento, and Risorgimento. Both Rinascimento and Risorgimento, though totally different times, involved a phase of inner renewal of Italian identity. You see, today, I was in your beautiful library. No, yesterday, I was in your beautiful library. I visited two of them. The one I'm referring to is the main one. It holds fine examples of the Divine Comedy by Dante Alighieri, the Florentine late Middle Age poet. Italian high-level language that is literary, poetic, and academic, is very antique. When in school, Italian students, I did the same, may read and pretend to understand 700 years old texts by Dante, Petrarca, and Boccaccio. But written language was and somehow still is an exception. In 1861, newborn Italy was extremely fragmented. A famous phrase attributed to the politician Massimo d'Azeglio goes like this: fatta l'Italia, adesso è il momento di fare, dobbiamo fare gli italiani. That is roughly, having made Italy, having reached the unity of Italy, we must now make Italians. So we must shape the Italian identity. The fathers of the country worked hard to shape the new national identity. Right after 1861, the year of the unification of Italy, scholars from different disciplines were called, traced, and sometimes invented unifying and cohesive factors. They shaped we Italians, our Italians' identity. This explained the efforts of Alessandro Manzoni in school programs, of Francesco De Santi in literature, Pellegrino Artusi in cooking. Italian cuisine is a myth. You have regional cuisines. It was invented by Pellegrino Artusi. And Adolfo Venturi in art history. I really cut it brief. There are several, many books and studies, such as I just quoted. So what was carried out in the field of art and architecture by Camillo Boito, again, to identify in the Renaissance a unitary and national style, and applied by architects such as Giuseppe Sacconi in the Vittoriano, find easily these parallels. Behind all this were a genuine patriotic spirit and genuine gratitude towards the new first king, Victor Emmanuel II, for having finally unified the country. Published in 1886, Cuore, Heart by Edmondo De Amicis remains the key novel for understanding these feelings, which, I repeat, were pure and genuine. But we must not underestimate the whole framework, which was not necessarily pure and genuine. Italy, one of the last entrants on the European scene, wanted to become quickly a world power. Colonialism, expansion, imperialism, these are other key concepts of the time, also to understand Italy. Why not? Like England, France, Belgium, the Netherlands, and Germany, Italy needed mental and cultural structures to expand outside its borders. For this, Italy equipped itself with tools which would advantage her in the international competition, so to build an empire for itself, something which started in 1880, 1882, in perfect synchrony with the Vittoriano. So let's see if I can start this. we're getting to the end. In 1906, 1907, a poor Spanish painter named Pablo Picasso put his hand to Les Demoiselles d'Avignon. Picasso struggled to get back to Paris to let his career take off. In fact, he made the Demoiselles in a poor and crumbling building named Les Bateaux Lavoir. 19th and early 20th century Paris exerted a strong attraction on American artists, collectors, and dealers. After all, the United States, even before France itself, was the first to appreciate and buy the Impressionists in the 1880s. Quite the same happened to Picasso. Just think of the US poetess Gertrude Stein. But another part of Americans was afraid, or at least suspicious, of Paris. We can call it the other side of the country. A well-thinking, bourgeois, Catholic, Puritan or Quaker, conservative and often very wealthy America, much quieter than the previous one. For this second America, Paris was and remained for decades the city of the Commune and Communard, the most famous insurrection of the times. And this was far to be all. Paris also was the city of brothels and prostitutes, something scandalous and of course attractive for non-French conformists. That is why many among the non-French kept away their children, sons, daughters, and students from it. And also, this kind of Americans preferred Rome to it. They preferred the very option of the recovering of the Renaissance. This is, for instance, the story of the great architect, Charles Follen McKim, and the story of the American Academy in Rome, which still exists today, right on top of the Janiculum Hill. After 1870, Rome entered into open competition with Paris. The Vittoriano must be read in this way. Rome did so by taking advantage of Paris' political problems. Paris in 1870 was crushed, defeated by Germany, the Germany of the Chancellor Bismarck. Rome also excluded a French artist, Henri Paul Nénon, who had legitimately won the first competition for the Vittoriano. True, Rome eventually lost the challenge, 4-0, no doubt about it. Despite the convinced support of the state, Rome failed to understand that academies and state exhibitions like the Biennale were almost useless. The real challenge of contemporary art lay in true and open linguistic research and breaking of conventions. This is the story told by Cubism and other avant-garde, including, of course, Futurism avant-garde, which in fact condemned the Vittoriano in no uncertain terms. Futurism was the first to condemn Vittoriano. Not surprisingly, it was precisely from here, from intellectuals connected to Futurism, such as Giovanni Papini, that the Vittoriano's misfortune would begin. But this would sound like the start of another story, the story of a condemnation of a monument. So I'd better stop here, and thank you very much. Yeah, please go ahead. I don't know how to handle this.
question. Maybe perhaps you can share with the audience some of the recent findings you guys have been finding with the statuary in Vittoriano.
Yeah.
You can tell us about it.
Absolutely. Extempore, that means out of program, okay? For those who are not familiar or totally familiar with Latin, the day before yesterday, I started to share with my good friend Samir Younes the new findings of the Vittoriano. Has been a lot of work in the running of the Vittoriano in the last 7-8 years. It started from 800,000 visitors. 2000 data are 2017-18. Now it raised to 5 million. It keeps raising and raising the number of visitors. And it's changing very quickly. This is one of the changes that was Professor Younes was mentioning. Okay, on top, above, you see usual, I wouldn't call it color, I mean, situation of the bronzes of the Vittoriano. The ones who got in Rome are used to see the contrast between the white of the Botticino marble, total white, with black or dark gray of bronze. And this is true everywhere, from the monument to the king in the center, to here, the victories in the beginning, just in front of when you're getting into the entrance. Now the news are that they were completely gilded. So it's bronze covered with gold. So here show some others. Very impressive situation. Of course, it is not being re-gilded. What you see is gold, which was underneath the patina. I'm speaking now to the experts of restoration, Marcus. And what wasn't there has been replaced by removable yellow terra di Siena. So it's color. So it's not nothing new, not new gold over it. This has been a much disputation on this point, criticizing not only Vittoriano, especially for restoration made in Russia. I'll just make one quick example to Tsarskoye Selo, because to put completely new leaf of gold, this is not the case. So these first results, we're talking of a photographs taken 8 days ago now, and the same thing is going to be applied everywhere, also in the quadrigas in bronze at the top. So the dynamics and the contrasts of color is going to change radically. When you get back to Rome and see the Vittoriano, is not going to be black, dark gray against white, it's going to be gold against white. Again, another, to me, it's quite astonishing, the contrast. Told you it was a kind of surprise, even I told you so.
I guess also the
Western statue of the king also going to be, it's all gilded as well.
Yeah, but there are traces. If you look closely, once you look at where the historians point, you can see very easily. After all, also the equestrian statue of Marcus Aurelius was totally gilded. And one must understand that the huge, enormous statue of King Victor Emmanuel I, at those times, the original, and talking to students of the Marcus Aurelius, was still at its place in the middle of Michelangelo's project in the capital. So you could almost see each other. There is a strong connection. It was taken as a model.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I was wondering if you could speak a little bit more to other examples of the Risorgimento national style in Rome and throughout Italy, and maybe how pervasive that style was at the time.
Thank you very much. The Rinascimento as the national style.
The Risorgimento.
I got it. Thank you very much. To me, the brightest example or kind is the Palazzo di Giustizia by Calderini on the other side of the Tiber, and there's a strong connection in ears and also in styles. Say, I worked quite a bit on Palazzo di Giustizia, not as much as I did with the Vittoriano. There is more inspiration to Andrea Palladio in the Palazzo di Giustizia. And I would say that it was discovered, this monument, by Americans. Many American scholars do not have so much prejudice against this kind of monuments as we Italians used to have. So probably now we are getting to the right distance to reestablish a good relationship with our past.
Oh, it's not working? Okay. Thank you. Could you say a little bit more about the role of Armando Brazzini in completing the monument?
Absolutely. One often thinks that Brazzini took over in 1924. There has been some months ago a congress on Armando Brazzini in Rome with many good scholars, and the actual date slipped to 1927, so that is from 1927 to 1937, so totally under the fascist regime. Armando Brazzini in the Vittoriano, as would say, completed quite all. Everywhere you can see his hand, because the monument, though inaugurated in 1911, was largely unfinished. To go to your point, for instance, the function, how it functions, how the tomb of the unknown soldiers is quite clever. The tomb of the unknown soldier was laid in 1921 to recall those Italian soldiers who fell in the First World Conflict, and who were not recognizable. This is a cult which is widespread, also in Washington, D.C., and Arlington Cemetery. We have the tomb of the unknown soldiers, which it's about the same years. Of course, it recalls U.S. soldiers who were not recognizable. But the fact is that the Vittoriano has nothing to do with religion. The body of the king lies in the Pantheon. It's not there, it's a memorial. But the introduction of a body dedicated to all soldiers, implied religion from the public. And this was not, let's say, previsto. One didn't think about it. The wives of the soldiers, the mothers of the soldiers, mainly, not only, wanted to also have a church relief. So there was a need for this. So what Brazzini did, he made a two-sided coffin. So one side of the coffin is outside. It has nothing to do with religion. It's a civil and, of course, war memorial. It's the body of the soldier. But inside, he built the chapel, which is religious. It's a Catholic chapel for praying to the body. It's the same coffin, outside and inside. The second very important innovation made by Armando Brazzini has to do with the statics of the Vittoriano. I said statics is a problem in the Vittoriano. Briefly, when the competition was issued, was given for granted that the weight of the building would lay on the top and on the side of the Capitol Hill. But this couldn't be made because simply it would fall apart. So it was invented to make a self-standing building, like a backpack on the Vittoriano. Sorry for the comparison.
So,
But eventually, the Vittoriano, right under Sacconi, started to fall eastbound. So one had to build another building so to sustain it. And this is the so-called Ala Brasini. The Ala Brasini is a huge gallery. It's a new museum built eastbound on the next to be Via dei Fori Imperiali, which still exists, and it's going to be another of the novelties of the Victoriano. 2025 is going to be open as an international new place of exhibition. And this was built by Brasini. It was thought by the Triumvirate, but was made technically by Brasini in the 30s. I would definitely put these two things. And also the quadrigas were made under his moment, was the director. So he managed to put these two huge bronze things right on the top. Not an easy thing to do. It was clever and very inventive.
There's one question I have about the discussions between Lanciani and Boito. Boito was defending the project, and Lanciani was against it. What was known about, Boito was arguing that the urban fabric that was there was not important enough and it could be removed. But what was known about the Roman foundation, the substructure, what existed below that fabric, and were extensive excavations conducted after the removal of that medieval fabric?
Okay, I couldn't say it better than you did. I mean, these are the two roles, the two main pillars. I would add that there was a strong ideological and political contrast between the destra storica, the right historical wing, that of course cannot be confused with fascism whatsoever. It was just very close to the Vatican, and Lanciani was part of it, was part of the major Leopoldo Torlonia as well, of the so-called black nobility, black aristocracy, that used this contrast as a tool to put in doubt the rightness of the opposite side, which was the sinistra storica, historical left, which has nothing to do with communism or socialism, just very, say, entrepreneur-like. And to get to the point, Lanciani made a list when the competition came out with all the issues made by De Preti himself, were written on and issued by the Gazzetta Ufficiale, that is what architects who want to compete must follow. The polemics started, and Lanciani wrote Lanciani was a key archaeologist and topographer of ancient Rome, much in contact with America himself, because he had an American wife. So he knew America. He kept conferences here in America and talked extremely bad about the next to come project. So he made a list, a 20 points list, writing, it's going to be destroyed this, 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 and this. And he gave it to Leopoldo Torlonia. And from then on, the point that Vittoriano destroyed the whole center of Rome became very, very popular. It is somehow still today. Again, forgetting something to me very important, it was and is a project. It's a strong sign. The world of semiotics and of course of urbanism, is very important to read correctly the Vittoriano. It's not just a sventramento, destroying something. It's a very thoughtful project. But the answer is no, to get finally to your point, was taken over, but not extensive. This was not the case of making new and extensive excavation. Things were discovered, of course, and For instance, the Museo di Roma, which is in Palazzo Braschi on Corso Vittorio Emanuele, holds quite a lot of things of which were discovered then or just kept. For instance, the frescoes of the so-called Torre, the Tower of Paul III, of Pope Paul III, that was kept frescoes. It was a magnificent 16th century architecture. You can find some things there, but not very much. Of course, also the Passetto was destroyed. The Passetto means the way that led from Palazzo Venezia to the tower itself. So many things have been destroyed. True, to me it has been a pleasure to see how Boito was so clever to manipulate things, thanks to his communication skills.
I have a question. Thanks for an informative lecture. I was wondering, and this is a provocative question, admittedly, do you see any role, any place in the present for the idea of a national style in architecture, or perhaps a local style?
First, thank you for the question. And I always adore how provocative questions are always made with a very soft tone. So the question is where you can find national style in the world. That is, so there are examples today of national style.
What do you think?
Yeah, to my opinion. There's been, the true thing is that there's a shade, I mean, there has been a shade in my, a moment in my lecture, which I always weigh a lot. Words have weight, of course. And there is the moment when I said was important yesterday, the Vittoriano, the subject of my phrase is Vittoriano, and is important today in non-fascist Italy, anti-fascist Italy, in Republican and democratic Italy, and European Italy. The role of the Vittoriano is again getting back towards the public now that somehow nationalism, at least in Italy, has been substituted by a wider concept. So if we speak about Europe and this strange and still unfinished political, cultural, economic, identitarian project, I would say that it's the time to, not to reevaluate, but to reconsider, this kind of monuments. Today we were talking with my colleagues about cemeteries, war memorials, which are very important for all the people who died. And I mean, it's something that must be again reconsidered. But to get to your question, I don't think that the same concept of language, of style, I prefer always the word language, must be considered deeply and widely. So I wouldn't say that there are styles, there are languages, but I don't believe that you can find it nationality behind it.
Well, thank you again, Paolo, for this knowledge.